This is a creek, defined in the dictionary as a narrow, sheltered waterway. Creeks dot the land throughout the world and run through any terrain available to them. Forests, mountains, and even the dry canyons of the desert. We're all familiar with the forests with green trees and lush shrubbery and the Rocky Mountains. But what about under the surface of these rushing rapids? These smaller waterways scattered across Pennsylvania have always been one of my passions. I spend a lot of time near the water, and that time, one thing I've noticed is the amount of life, the various species that you can observe if only you seek it out. One such species is the creek chub, one of my personal favorites. The creek chub contributes to their communities in a very special way. See, during mating season, when a male sees a female they see fit for as a mate, he digs a ditch in the sediment in order to impress her. If she finds herself satisfied and is impressed, she will lay her eggs in the ditch, and the male will continue to fertilize them. The male stays with the nest over the next week or so while the embryos grow and develop into young fry. However, if she does not like the product of his work, that ditch is abandoned. This is when some other species come in, such as the common shiner. The common shiner is a very densely populated species in the eastern and northern parts of North America. They take up a large amount of the lower parts of the food chain and feed dozens of animals. These abandoned nests are better than anything the shiners could build, so when they can't find a suitable, safe space to have fry, the old nest can be perfect for any fish that haven't been able to make a nest. But creeks also provide for the larger, more famous species. When available to them, the larger, better-known species such as trout or bass swim upstream to lay their eggs. And the smaller ecosystems provide a safe space away from larger threats, and the smaller bait fish are a perfect source of food for the young predators. Continuing to move up the food chain, the bigger species are consumed by birds, reptiles, amphibians, and of course, mammals, including people. Reviewing what we know, let me walk you through a scenario. A young male creek chub hatches from an egg. Over the next year or so, he survives his childhood and grows to be an adult, until he sees a female who he decides he wants to impress. After spending some time digging a burrow in the sand beneath him, the female is still unimpressed, and he swims off to try again another day. But the dish is left there, left to be found by a school of shiners. A pair in the school is ready to mate, but have not found a safe space to lay their eggs. The eggs are successfully raised, and most of the young fry grow up to be in a school. A few years after the original chub is born, a small school of smallmouth bass attack the group. They are very successful and get their fill for the time being. A few years later after that, the smallmouth bass finally move back into the larger river they came from. Over time, they have children of their own, or get caught or eaten by any of the people or animals that frequent and live off of the river. Of course, there's hundreds of different ways that could have gone. The original eggs, the shiners, the young bass, they all could have been consumed earlier on. The bass could feed any number of animals on different directions of this food chain. Did you know, across all the types, locational, and seasonal factors, it's close to impossible to even estimate how many living things we have in a creek? Granted, the majority of life in these small ecosystems are larvae, or too tiny to notice, but I find it crazy that in just one of these creeks, the amount of life could possibly be bigger than the total human population. Just a while ago, we actually found a small sectioned-off area that acted as a breeding ground for both Johnny Darters and fathead minnows. Some natural debris blocked off the flow and created a small lagoon, perfect for nests and eggs. We found nests, babies, and even a pregnant female. But in just this little area, we also found a metal post and a candy wrapper. Even the areas these fish depend on are being attacked. This is not an uncommon problem. If anything, it seems to be normalized. But this kind of thing is hurting our ecosystems. The last years, things like mines and construction sites have been pouring all their runoff into our waterways as a cheap and lazy solution. These chemicals harm our waters more than any plastic, as it rises to toxicity and makes all life harder to sustain. This sewer pipe takes runoff from the highway and dumps it downstream straight over the breeding spot. That is oil, gas, and coolant, all being picked up by rain and deposited into the drains along the highway. Up to global warming, various fungal, parasitic, and viral diseases such as fin rot or gill mites need a warm environment to prosper. With global climate change, we have seen a spike in these cases of these ailments. But really, do these lives matter? I mean, they're just fish, right? All they do is feed, swim, and reproduce. But studies have shown that fish actually have personalities. Obviously, it isn't on the same level as people, but the point is that they have feeling. and they can think for themselves. I'm going to quote from one of my favorite of these studies where guppies were put in different situations and the reactions were recorded. Quote, "The researchers tested whether differences could be measured on a simple spectrum of how risk-averse or risk-prone guppies were. But our research shows that the reality is much more complex. For example, when placed under and into unfamiliar environments, we found that guppies have various strategies for coping with this stressful situation. Many attempt to hide, others try to escape, some explore cautiously, and so on. Every single fish in a school, in a creek, in a country, they each have their own thoughts." Now, with that, let me go through another scenario. A sickly female creek chub has eggs. She sees a male who builds a nest. It's not a good nest, but she needs to lay her eggs while she still can. She lays her eggs and swims away to rest. However, the water is too toxic, and the vast majority of the eggs die out and never hatch. No ditch for the shiners, no food for the bass, and no food for the people or animals. This is a problem that we need to fix. That much is obvious, but what can we do about it? Well, first off, just pick up your trash. There's no point in just leaving it on the ground. But that one's obvious. We need to take action against the literally and figuratively toxic actions of larger companies, and we need to find a better alternative for highway runoff. I know that this isn't easy, but I just hope that I helped you realize that something needs to happen. And hopefully next time that you find yourself down by the shore of a creek, maybe you'll have a new appreciation for it.